1/5 of the world's oil, one strait, 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. And right now, Iran controls it. Not informally, not theoretically. There is a form, there is an authority, there is a bureaucracy. And if your ship tries to pass without permission, the IRGC will come for it. 1 week, 40 ships. The pre-war number was 120, every single day. The world's most important waterway has been taken hostage, and the question no one can answer is this: does the United States actually intend to take it back? What you are about to hear is not a hypothetical scenario from a geopolitical think tank. It is not a war game exercise from a military college. It is happening right now, today, in the waters between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula. Iran has created a new government authority to permanently control the Strait of Hormuz. Ships must apply for permission. They must declare their cargo, their crew, their owners, their destination. And if the information is wrong, Iran says the consequences fall entirely on the vessel, which, in IRGC terms, means your ship gets seized or struck. 20,000 civilian sailors are trapped inside the Persian Gulf right now. Gas prices in the United States just hit $4.50 per gallon for the first time in 4 years. And the global oil market is pricing in something far worse to come. In this video, we are going to tell you 3 things. First, exactly what Iran has done, and why it is far more significant than it sounds. Second, who stands to win, who stands to lose, and who is already suffering on the water right now. And third, the one contradiction at the heart of American policy that Iran is actively exploiting and that most coverage is completely ignoring. We cover stories like this before anyone else. Subscribe now and hit the bell, because this one is moving fast, and you do not want to miss the next update. Let us get into it. On May 7, 2026, CNN obtained a document that changes the calculus of this conflict in a fundamental way. The document is titled Vessel Information Declaration. It is an application form, more than 40 questions long. It is issued by Iran's newly created Persian Gulf Strait Authority, the PGSA, and it is now the mandatory gateway for any ship seeking to transit the Strait of Hormuz. The form demands the vessel's name, its identification number, any previous names, because Iran wants to know if you have tried to rebrand to avoid detection. It requires the nationalities of the registered owners and the operators. It demands the nationalities of every crew member on board, and it requires a complete declaration of the cargo. Once submitted by email to the PGSA, the authority will respond with further instructions. It is unconfirmed whether any shipping company has yet complied, and there is a very good reason for that reluctance, which we will get to shortly. This document was shared with CNN by Lloyd's List, one of the world's oldest and most authoritative maritime intelligence services, and by a second anonymous shipping industry source. Its authenticity is not in question. On the same day, marine traffic data showed virtually zero tanker or freight traffic moving through the strait. The waterway that handles 1/5 of the world's oil and gas has become, for practical purposes, closed. This is not an informal blockade. Iran has built a government institution to run it. To understand why this moment is so significant, you need to understand what came before it. Before the end of February 2026, the Strait of Hormuz was free passage, no permission required, no authority to answer to. Any vessel, any flag, any cargo, the international maritime principle of free navigation applied. That changed when the United States and Israel launched a military campaign against Iran. The campaign targeted Iran's nuclear infrastructure and military capacity. Iran, unable to match American or Israeli air power directly, turned to the one leverage point it has always held: the strait. In the early weeks of the conflict, Iran's approach was threatening but informal. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy began using emergency radio frequencies to warn shipping that it controlled the waterway. Vessels were warned to seek IRGC consent before passing. A number of ships were seized or struck. The majority of ship owners and operators made a rational calculation. The risk is too high. They stopped sending vessels through. By late March, Iran had begun publicly discussing the strait as a wartime spoil, a prize to be institutionalized, not merely a temporary pressure point. Supreme Leader Khamenei issued a statement at the end of April, formally announcing that Iran would create mechanisms to supervise traffic and implement what he called new legal frameworks for managing the waterway. And now it has. The PGSA is not a proposal. It is operational. It has an email address. It is sending correspondence to shipping companies. It is the infrastructure of control, bureaucratized, formalized, and designed to outlast the conflict that created it. Iran is not trying to close the strait forever. It is trying to own it permanently. We told you at the beginning there was a question no one can answer, whether the United States actually intends to take this strait back. We are getting to that. And what we found is more unsettling than you might expect. There are several forces in this confrontation, and each one has a different calculation. Start with Iran's supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei. On Wednesday, his official Telegram account posted a message that deserves to be read carefully. He called for, in his own words, a new regional and global order under the strategy of a strong Iran. A world where foreigners have no place in the Persian Gulf, except, as he put it, at the bottom of its waters. That is not rhetorical flourish. That is a policy statement. The PGSA is the institutional expression of that vision. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy is the enforcement arm. It uses IRGC speedboats to intercept and board vessels. It uses radio communications to assert authority. In late April, it seized the cargo ship Epaminondas. It has established a new maritime control area extending west and east of the strait and stretching into the Gulf of Oman, significantly expanding the zone of claimed Iranian authority. On the American side, President Trump has been inconsistent. He launched Project Freedom, a naval escort program to assist vessels through the strait. Then he paused it within 48 hours, at the request of Pakistani mediators. That pause sent a signal Iran was watching very carefully. The United States Treasury Department has issued explicit guidance. Paying Iran for passage, any toll, any fee, is unauthorized for any American person, company, or U.S.-controlled foreign entity. The legal wall is clear, but India and Pakistan have already gone around it. Both governments have negotiated bilaterally with Iran to secure passage for their flagged vessels. These are not rogue actors. These are major U.S. partner nations making separate deals with a country under American military pressure. Pakistan is simultaneously mediating between Washington and Tehran. That is a remarkable position to hold, and it tells you how fractured the Western response actually is. Let us talk about the people no one is talking about. 20,000 of them, civilians, merchant mariners from dozens of countries, the Philippines, India, Indonesia, Ukraine, Bangladesh, Greece. They work on nearly 1,000 vessels currently trapped inside the Persian Gulf. They cannot exit through the strait without Iranian permission. They cannot exit any other way. There is no other way. Dimitris Maniatis, the CEO of maritime risk consultancy Marisks, described their situation with clarity that cuts through all the geopolitical noise. Mariners, he said, are not soldiers. They are civilians, piloting vessels and managing global trade. They should not be caught in a situation like this. And yet, they are. Trapped. Waiting. Their families don't know when they are coming home. Their food and water supplies are being consumed. The psychological toll of being a civilian hostage in a military confrontation, unable to move, unable to leave, unable to escape, is enormous. Those few vessels that do transit do so under Iranian escort. According to Maniatis, ships granted IRGC permission sail a specific voyage plan that takes them between the islands of Keshem and Larak, close to the Iranian coast, under constant surveillance, entirely at Tehran's mercy. Only 40 ships crossed the strait in the entire week ending May 3rd. Before the conflict, the average was 120 crossings per day. That is not a disruption. That is a collapse. The strait is functionally closed. On the global economic side, the consequences are already visible and accelerating. U.S. gas prices rose above $4.50 per gallon this week, the highest in 4 years. This is not a forecast. This is today's price at the pump. But here's the part that mainstream coverage is almost entirely missing, and it changes the entire picture of where this is heading. If you are finding this valuable, subscribe. We are just getting to the most important part. The world has not responded with a unified front. It has responded with fracture, and Iran is watching every crack. The United States has stated clearly it will not accept Iranian control of the Strait of Hormuz. That is the official position. U.S. Navy assets remain in the region. The Treasury Department has issued sanctions guidance. Project Freedom was announced with considerable fanfare. And then, Project Freedom was paused. The UN has weighed in on the humanitarian dimension, warning of what it calls an unprecedented crisis for seafarers in the Persian Gulf. Crew welfare organizations and shipping unions have called for immediate safe passage guarantees. These calls have produced no concrete result. India and Pakistan, both significant regional powers, both navigating complex relationships with both Washington and Tehran, have pursued quiet bilateral diplomacy to secure their vessels' transit rights. They did not wait for a multilateral solution. They went directly to Iran, acknowledged Iranian authority over the waterway, and negotiated passage. The Gulf Arab states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, are watching with acute anxiety. Qatar's massive LNG export operations depend on Hormuz. Saudi oil flows depend on Hormuz. These nations have significant natural gas infrastructure and deep American security partnerships, and yet their ability to get oil and gas to market is now subject to Iranian approval. China, the world's largest importer of Gulf oil, has been notably quiet publicly. But Beijing's economic stake in resolved Hormuz access is enormous. The longer this continues, the more pressure Beijing faces to involve itself in the diplomacy. Global shipping insurance rates for vessels transiting the region have surged to wartime levels. Many major shipping companies have rerouted entirely around the Cape of Good Hope, adding weeks and enormous costs to voyages that used to take days. Here is what most outlets are not giving adequate weight to, and it is the detail that reframes this entire story. Iran is not just seizing a moment of wartime leverage, it is building a permanent institution. The Persian Gulf Strait Authority is not a temporary emergency measure. It has a name. It has an official email address. It sends formal correspondence. It has issued a 40-question application form. It is modeled, deliberately, on the kind of bureaucratic authority that, once established, becomes the baseline assumption for all future negotiations. This is the strategy of normalization. Iran does not need to win a military confrontation with the United States Navy to retain control of the strait. It needs time. It needs shipping companies to file the paperwork, even once, because the moment a company submits a vessel information declaration to the PGSA, it has implicitly acknowledged that the PGSA has authority. And once enough companies do that, Iran can point to a pattern of compliance and call it international recognition. Richard Meade of Lloyd's Intelligence described it precisely. The new requirements look similar to questions Iran was already asking informally, but the PGSA formalizes the structure and is a play by Iran to normalize its authority over transits. There is also a revenue dimension that has been underreported. Tehran has reportedly been charging up to $2 million per vessel for passage. The U.S. Treasury has specifically banned American entities from making such payments, but non-American entities, including operators of vessels flagged in India, Pakistan, and other nations, face a different calculus entirely. If Iran collects tolls consistently, the strait becomes not just a geopolitical prize, but a revenue stream. And revenue streams, once flowing, are extremely difficult to shut off. The question underneath the question is this: is the United States truly prepared to take military action to shut down a functioning, internationally tolerated Iranian maritime authority? Or will the world simply adapt to the new reality? And here is where we arrive at the contradiction at the heart of American policy. Because the answer, when you look carefully at what the U.S. is actually doing versus what it is saying, is far more ambiguous than any official statement suggests. Let us be precise about what is actually at risk here, because the numbers involved are staggering. The Strait of Hormuz handles roughly 20% of the world's traded oil, and 17% of global LNG. There is no full alternative. The Saudi East-West pipeline can move some Saudi crude to Red Sea terminals, but it handles only a fraction of Gulf output. The UAE's Habshan-Fujairah pipeline offers a partial bypass, but again, it cannot absorb the full volume. There is no pipeline workaround for Qatari LNG. Qatar is the world's largest LNG exporter. Its product moves through Hormuz, or it does not move. If Iranian control is sustained long-term, Kepler's Matt Wright estimates transits could stabilize at 40 to 50% of pre-war capacity. That is a permanent reduction in global oil and gas supply, not a temporary shock, but a structural shift in global energy markets. The consequences cascade. Higher energy prices drive inflation. Inflation erodes consumer purchasing power globally. Nations dependent on fuel imports, particularly across South and Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and parts of Europe, face economic stress that has nothing to do with their own policy choices. Beyond the economic dimension, there is the geopolitical precedent. If a regional power successfully seizes permanent administrative control of an international waterway, in defiance of the United States, international maritime law, and sustained economic pressure, what does that mean for other contested choke points globally? The Taiwan Strait, the South China Sea, the Bab el-Mandeb. Every authoritarian actor in the world is watching how this plays out. The worst case is a military confrontation between the United States Navy and IRGC forces in the strait, with the potential for rapid escalation, oil infrastructure strikes, and a regional war with no clear off-ramp. The best case is a diplomatic settlement that preserves some form of face-saving Iranian authority in exchange for restored transit, essentially a toll arrangement legitimized through back-channel negotiation. The most likely case, at this moment, appears to be a prolonged standoff, in which Iran's bureaucratic authority over the strait gradually solidifies, shipping companies quietly seek accommodation, and the world's oil markets reprice to reflect a permanently constrained supply corridor. The analysts who spend their careers tracking maritime trade and geopolitical risk are not optimistic. Matt Wright of Kepler, one of the leading marine intelligence firms in the world, has put his assessment on the record. He sees growing evidence that Iran may seek to retain strategic control of the strait for as long as possible. And critically, he says the United States may tolerate this outcome. Under long-term Iranian control, he estimates transits would not exceed 50% of pre-war averages. He has stated directly that normalization of full transit is not achievable under this scenario. Richard Mead of Lloyd's List Intelligence has framed the PGSA document as Iran's attempt to normalize its authority, to transform a wartime seizure into a peacetime institution through the slow bureaucratic accumulation of compliance. Dimitris Maniatis of Marisks has focused on the human cost, the seafarers trapped in the Gulf, the impossibility of their situation, and the moral failure of a global community that has thus far produced no mechanism for their rescue. From a legal standpoint, analysts note that any shipping company that submits the PGSA declaration form faces a profound dilemma. Under U.S. Treasury guidance, such compliance could expose them to sanctions if it constitutes a payment or acknowledgement of Iranian authority. Under Iranian IRGC threat, non-compliance means their vessel is at risk of seizure or attack. There is no clean option. Political scientists focused on Iran argue that Khamenei's telegram message, his explicit articulation of a new regional and global order anchored by Iranian control of Hormuz, is not wartime rhetoric to be walked back at the negotiating table. It is a strategic doctrine. Iran's leadership views the strait not as a bargaining chip, but as a permanent strategic asset that reshapes the Islamic Republic's position in the world order. Military analysts with backgrounds in Gulf operations point out that the U.S. Navy has not surged assets into the strait in a way that suggests an imminent military operation to reopen it by force. That restraint is noted in Tehran, and it is being interpreted there as a signal of American hesitation. We began this video with a question. Does the United States actually intend to take back the Strait of Hormuz? Here is what we now know, and it is more unsettling than a simple yes or no. Washington says it will not accept Iranian control, but it paused Project Freedom at the request of Pakistan. It has not surged military assets, and its own intelligence analysts suggest it may tolerate the outcome it says it will not accept. Iran is reading that gap clearly, and it is building its bureaucracy while the gap remains open. 3 scenarios, based on current trajectory. Best case, diplomatic breakthrough, brokered through Pakistani and potentially Omani or Chinese mediation, produces an agreement in which Iran formally withdraws the PGSA in exchange for sanctions relief, a U.S. commitment to end the military campaign, and some form of reconstruction financing. Full transit resumes within weeks. Oil markets stabilize. This scenario requires both sides to accept significant domestic political cost. It is possible. It is not the current direction of travel. Likely case, prolonged ambiguity. The PGSA continues to operate. Shipping companies from non-U.S. jurisdictions, Indian, Chinese, South Korean, Greek operators, quietly begin filing declarations, not as a political statement, but as a commercial necessity. Iran collects tolls, Oil transits at reduced levels, 40 to 60% of pre-war volume. The U.S. maintains its formal position of non-acceptance while practically tolerating the situation. Gas prices remain elevated. The global economy adjusts painfully upward. This scenario is not a resolution, it is a new normal, and new normals have a way of becoming permanent. Worst case, a U.S. vessel or a vessel under American escort is struck by the IRGC, or Iran escalates by striking Saudi or Emirati oil infrastructure in response to continued pressure. The regional conflict expands. Iran activates proxy networks across the Middle East. The U.S. responds with strikes on IRGC positions in and around the strait. The resulting military confrontation, even a limited one, disrupts what remains of Gulf shipping, sends oil to triple digits, and creates a crisis that dwarfs anything the global economy has faced since 2008. The next 72 hours of diplomatic signaling, particularly from Washington, from Pakistan, and from Iran's own state media, will tell us which scenario is gaining momentum. We want to hear from you, because this is a story with no easy answers, and the debate matters. Here is our first question. Do you think shipping companies should comply with Iran's PGSA form, even if it means implicitly acknowledging Iranian authority over the strait, to protect their crews, their cargo, and the global trade system? Or does compliance make the problem worse by legitimizing what Iran has done? And our second question. If the United States does ultimately tolerate Iranian control of the Strait of Hormuz, even while publicly refusing to accept it, what does that tell us about American power and credibility in the region going forward? Tell us in the comments. Challenge each other. Push back on our analysis. We read every single comment, and your perspective genuinely shapes how we cover the next chapter of this story. Let us bring this together with the 3 things you need to carry forward. 1. Iran has not just threatened the Strait of Hormuz, it has institutionalized its control. The Persian Gulf Strait Authority is real, it is operational, and it is designed to outlast the conflict that created it. This is not leverage, this is architecture. 2. The human cost is already enormous and growing. 20,000 civilian seafarers are trapped. Global gas prices are at a 4-year high, and shipping through the world's most critical energy corridor has collapsed by more than 95% in a single week. 3. The United States is saying one thing and doing another, and Iran is betting its entire strategy on that contradiction continuing. Whether Washington closes that gap or Iran successfully normalizes its new authority will determine not just the price of oil, but the shape of the global order for years to come. Watch for the following in the coming days. Watch whether any major shipping company files the PGSA declaration form, because the first company to do so will break a dam. Watch whether Pakistan's mediation produces any concrete framework. Watch whether the U.S. Navy repositions assets into the strait, because movement there will signal whether Project Freedom is truly paused or truly abandoned. And watch Khamenei's communications, because his public framing of the strait is the clearest window into where Iran's leadership believes this is heading. This story is not over. In fact, what happens in the next 72 hours could change everything. Subscribe and hit the bell, because when it breaks, we will be the first to cover it. The strait is 21 miles wide. The stakes could not be larger. And the world is watching a new order being written in real time, one bureaucratic form at a time.